Hello, my name is Jupiter Hadley, and today we're doing another Indie Dev Spotlight, this time with Jordan. Hello.
Hello there.
And you have made a lot of Game Jam games. Specifically, you do a lot with the 1 hour Game Jam.
I do, yes. It's quite a lot. It's certainly the one I've entered the most games for. Um, I'm not sure if it was my first Game Jam, but that I think the very first one I entered was the JS13K Game Jam.
Oh,
I did it as a team effort. It's not one I've actually got listed on my itch.io profile.
no.
But that was a team effort one I entered. And a game called Drawbacks, where the whole idea was you did the opposite of what it told you to do.
Okay. But what sparked your interest in Game Jams to begin with?
I think the main thing, which I think maybe a lot of other developers, game-wise and other, can kind of sympathize and recognize, is that a lot of people don't complete projects or have a great difficulty completing personal projects. I mean, myself included. And I love the fact that so many game jams have a time limit. Even things like JS13K, which it's around a month.
Yeah,
And
this
then
is a longer one.
Yeah, and Ludum Dare's 48 plus hours, and obviously 1 hour game jam, created as in the name, is 1 hour. So you kind of get that kind of really restriction that forces you to release something that's at least in some way finished. So I think that really made me interested, because it means I've got all these experiments, but no one can see them because I never finish it. So being forced to do that, and also their kind of strict time limits and rules, force you to kind of scope your game to something that becomes playable, and it's not just kind of a tiny tech demo.
Yeah.
So the incentive that it provides to actually get something released is probably what sparked my interest the most.
That makes a whole lot of sense. Did you continue to make Game Jam games just so that you can continue to produce like little projects to play as a hobby?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it's hobby wise for me, I think, really, because I find it as a good way of playing with ideas, be it different game mechanics or different engines to use, which can be very dangerous if you're doing a limited game jam, if you're
Yeah.
trying something completely new. But I find it good fun to try and do that. And I really enjoy programming in general, not just game things. So I have got a lot of personal projects of a variety of things, and I find the challenge of game jams, especially the shorter ones, really good.
Out of curiosity, what other things do you program?
Well, I'm a web developer. By day, as I put it, is my main full-time job. So a lot of the things I have, say, open sourced on my GitHub profile, are usually like libraries that will help web developers. Quite a lot of them in PHP. I also play around with artificial intelligence related things, neural networks, and those kind of simulations interest me quite a lot. So I've got a few projects up like that. And the occasional thing to do with kind of peer-to-peer networking interests me quite a lot. So I've got a lot of broad scope of things I like to dabble in.
That's a big umbrella, far more than just games, just the traditional games.
Yeah, definitely. But it's just an interest in programming in general. But gaming, I mean, games are one that I like to do. I've probably got more game projects out there than other things. Simply because you're making something, and it's something that you can enjoy playing afterwards, and hopefully other people can enjoy too.
Yeah, there's a big level of fun when it comes to games.
Definitely.
So I want to talk a lot about the 1 hour game jam, really, because it's a game jam that I'm not sure if you're aware. I don't cover the 1 hour game jam because there's so many of them.
Oh yeah, I think anyone would have an incredible difficulty to cover the amount that's there.
Oh yeah.
And the weekly streams don't always happen either, just because not everyone has the time to do it.
So the 1 hour game jam is a game jam that's literally 1 hour to create something that works. There's a theme, I believe every week, it happens every week, and there are quite a few people that do enter it semi-regularly or regularly. How do you go about tackling making a thing in 1 hour?
Quickly. I think.
Well, I'd hope.
but realistically, I kind of tend to, when I'm doing it, I tend to spend around 10 to 30 minutes trying to come up with the idea.
Okay.
Ideally closer to the 10 minutes.
Yeah, because 30, that's half your time gone.
I know, it's crazy. But what I'll usually do is I'll often take little bits of boilerplate code from previous weeks, stuff that kind of applies to every single game, such as like managing scenes and switching between scenes, or making game objects, or the logic of collisions, because that kind of stuff never changes. So it's easy to just nab that from older versions. And that kind of helps speed things up. I try and tend to keep good code quality when I'm doing this, but you've got an hour, so it really.
I can't imagine very organized code in an hour.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. The first kind of 80%, I'll be like, okay, good code quality here, and then the last 20% just panicked rush and variables and objects flying everywhere. But no, I mean, it is very challenging. Even uploading or deploying the game after you've made it takes at least a good 5 to 10 minutes usually, just to kind of set up somewhere to host it, for example, or upload it or whatever, and then actually submitting it. However, there is kind of a bit of an unwritten rule in the 1 hour game jam that you're not, unless you've done a few of them, you don't necessarily know. They do allow you to submit slightly over the 1 hour limit. So it's kind of a soft limit in that way. You know, everyone aims to get it done within an hour. But if you ever look towards the end of the jam, you'll see a few games on there usually within the hour. But if you keep refreshing for a good 10 minutes or so afterwards, you'll see games keep getting added.
That's a good little time period to allow you to upload, because that just takes a bit of the edge off.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's depending on how you've done it as well. I mean, I once tried to use a different engine that I'd never tried before in this, which was probably a bit silly, but I wanted to challenge myself.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the game jam, I realized I couldn't work out how to export the game into something playable, just because I'd never used it before. It took me a good 10 minutes or so to just research and find that, so I could actually get it out there and let them and submit it and let people play it. So yeah, there were a lot of challenges like that.
Sorry, it's a whole lot more intense just to be dealing with a whole new thing as well. That's insane.
I don't do it most of the time.
Learned your lesson.
Yeah.
But why do you choose the 1 hour game jam? Is it just that's the amount of time you have per week to develop a game, or is it just that intense challenge that you really like to take part in?
Well, I mean, I'll have to admit, I don't do it every single week. I mean, I wish I could. That would be awesome. But yeah, mainly it is a really good challenge, and I find it fun to try and come up with an idea that's in some way related to the theme, and actually bulking that idea out into something that's actually playable. And as I've said before, it's a good way of trying out new game things without too much of a risk. No one really heavily judges you on a game that's made in an hour.
No.
Because obviously it's made in an hour. Most people don't have high expectations for that kind of thing. But I like to think most of the things I've done are at least semi-polished. You know, you can play them. There's
all of them are playable, yes.
Exactly. That's the goal. I want something where, you know, there's no complete bugs that completely break the thing, and it's at least a tiny bit fun.
Cool. So you seem to use Pico 8, the engine, more often than not for the 1 hour game jam. Do you find that Pico 8 is a very good engine to make a game in such a short amount of time, or is it something you're more comfortable with?
Yeah, I really like Pico 8. I think the main reason is probably because it provides editors built in for everything you tend to need to use. So it's got the code editor, it's got a graphics editor for basic sprites, and you've got audio, and it's all within the same interface. So there's very little switching between programs and saving things and exporting things and whatnot, and making other things work with other things. It's just all integrated. and I suppose Pico 8's low kind of graphical and technical restrictions, because it's supposed to be, for people who don't know, it's supposed to be a fantasy console from kind of the 8-ish
Yeah.
bit era. So it's got this kind of low bit graphics and technical restrictions. It can't run games too fast and things. So I think those restrictions and low graphics kind of suit the kind of game you'd expect someone to be able to develop in about an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of the pixel art graphics, it's quick to make something that looks semi-reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
If I was to draw, I mean, I'm in no way an artist. Pixel art's close to my limit there. So if I was to draw anything by hand fully and not with some kind of pixel editor or anything, and do it in an hour, it would look absolutely horrific. The kind of pixel art that Pico 8 and a few other things provide, it kind of lets you spit out graphics that at a very basic level at least look acceptable.
Mm. And you can tell what everything is in your games, even just the ones made for an hour. You can see what everything's meant to be, and it makes sense, and it does have that Pico 8 style that you associate with the engine.
Yeah, I try and do it so it's not necessarily the best kind of pixel art in the world, but at least you can see what it's supposed to represent at the very least.
But like your 10 Seconds of Easter, which was for the 1 hour game jam 103, you have like a little bunny and Easter eggs, and that bunny and those Easter eggs are more than what I could do in an hour. Just those graphics. We're not talking about the gameplay, but just those graphics are more than I could ever do in an hour.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that one, because if anyone plays it, they'll see that the gameplay itself is ridiculously simple, because I did spend most of the time drawing that little bunny.
It's a very adorable bunny. The gameplay is just sort of there's Easter eggs flying out, and you collect as many as you can before time runs out and get a high score.
Yeah, I didn't really think too much about story in that game. I can't really see why the Easter Bunny's getting eggs thrown at him, but there we go.
Easter bunnies, they do something with eggs. No one's quite sure what's going on there. Fits.
Exactly.
Yeah. Most of your games are playable in browser, such as that Easter egg game. Do you think this makes a big difference when it comes to the number of people who end up playing your game that's entered in a jam?
Well, I mean, I've not seen any statistics to back this up at all, but I would probably say that in-browser style games are probably played more than those that need downloading. I imagine it's even more prevalent in larger game jams.
Yeah, like the Ludum Dare, for example.
That was exactly the example I was going to give, because then people are aiming to judge hundreds or even thousands of those games, and if you can just click the logo and be straight in the game, after a few seconds, people are going to be more keen to do that than downloading the game and running it and things like that. Obviously, there's a bit of other than just like the time to download it. If you're downloading a program, you've potentially got to virus check everything, run it, because a lot of these game jams, anyone could submit things. You open yourself up there. So, I have to admit, when I've judged Ludum Dare games, I have used other sites to sort by HTML5 games, just so I can get through a few quickly, because I do find myself sometimes having little time to judge Ludum Dare ones, so that can really help. I imagine you've probably got your own thoughts on this as well, given the enormous amount of game jam games you tend to cover.
Yes, I find it very, very helpful when developers provide games that are in browsers, because of that exactly. There's so many different games being entered in some bigger jams, especially like Ludum Dare. And it's very time consuming to download and then unzip. And then also, so the game might not actually work. And if it's in browser, you could see that the game doesn't work. But if it's a zip file, I find a lot of times, especially right after Ludum Dare ends, I'll download games and they'll be missing a .dll or whatever file, so it won't run. And then I'll message the developer and they'll have to upload a new one. And that's a lot of hassle for me as a player. So I'm appreciative of your effort to put everything in browser. I quite enjoy that.
It's, I suppose, as well, with downloadable games, you're not sure whether it's a problem with what the developer's done, or it's a problem with your computer. But with web games, it's really just, does it work in the browser or doesn't it? There's no your side of it.
And it can also work across like Linux computers, Mac computers, and Windows computers if you do it in your browser. And I find that it's something that's often overlooked in game jams, just putting it on a browser so that everyone can play it. But
definitely.
It's definitely something important that time should be spent on.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a tendency actually outside of game jam games, if I'm developing something like that I'm intending to a game I'm intending to sell, I very strongly consider using kind of HTML game development, HTML, JavaScript for actually developing the game, and then package it in one of the various kits you can get to make it look like a desktop game but actually be running in a dedicated browser.
It's quite a nice amount of effort you put in. Makes me happy. I like browser-based games so much better than downloading all of these games.
I try it because it lets people play, especially small indie games as well. itch.io games. If they're free and people can just click and go and immediately try it out. I think there's another step to get people to download it. You have to convince them in your description of the game. While if the game's sitting there right at the top and you can immediately play it, they don't need to be convinced. They can just immediately try it.
You don't have to sell them on your page. Although you do make a really good effort setting up your game pages for these little tiny jam games. Like you always have some pictures and a description telling me what jam it's from and everything.
I try and cover all the basic details for it. I mean, I like game jams. I want to kind of push the game jam as well at the same time. So, if people are reading it and they're in any way interested in development, they can go, oh, what's this? And go have a look.
It's quite a nice reason to do it for. So, a lot of your games that are made for both the 1 hour game jam and the Ludum Dare is the other big jam that you have games on your itch.io for. They're all like arcade-styled games. Well, quite a few of them are arcade-styled games. Is that your favorite genre to make, or is it like the easiest one to complete in a jam time frame?
Arcade ones, yeah. I tend to like the genre for game jams, especially for the 1 hour game jam. You're very right there. I do them almost exclusively. I think my 1 hour game jam ones are some kind of arcade game.
Yeah, they all seem to be.
I'm not sure it's my favorite game jam overall, but they're certainly a great choice for time restricted game jams, especially if you're starting off with game development in general. Like I find one of the things that can really slow down game development is content generation. So like writing a story, generating the levels, and so on. And arcade games traditionally have very little storyline, if any.
Yeah.
And often their levels are kind of the same playthrough each. It's the same level with different things. Yeah. Or sometimes they are different, but they're procedurally generated. And procedural generation is something that really interests me as well. So I do try and put that into a lot of my games where I can. So yeah, I mean, although arcade games are quick to play, which is kind of essential for things where they need to be judged quickly too. But yeah, as I say, it's not necessarily my favorite game genre to play overall, but it certainly suits a lot of these jams.
So I'm just going to go through some of the games that you've made that are arcadey for the 1 hour game jam specifically.
Sure.
You've got like Green Arrow, which is a quick reaction game where you have to press the arrow that's lit up, and which one's like displayed on the screen. There's the Fairy Forest, which is sort of Flappy Bird-esque. Fly Swatter, which is squashing flies before time runs out. There's Laser Reflector, which is a pretty cool game in my opinion. It's one of my favorite 1 hour game jam games that you have, where you just try to deflect a laser into a point on the screen, but the laser itself's moving across the top of the screen, so you have to like get it at the right angle at the right time, which is quite tricky.
It was quite a tricky one to program, actually. I tried to make the laser's motion work correctly mathematically, And I ended up just coding this and trying to do it in Pico 8 and think, this is taking me forever. So the laser actually works in a really strange way code-wise. It doesn't really work as well as it turned out to look, but it seems to do the trick. People, no one's noticed it behaves quite oddly.
I've noticed now it behaves quite. No, I liked it. I enjoyed the laser very much, and I enjoyed the challenge of trying to move with the laser so it hit the right spot.
Yeah.
You've also got Sideways 8 Parachute, which is just your sort of parachute guy or person falling across screen trying not to hit anything. You've got a very challenging game called Jail Cell Puzzle, where you have to hit buttons in like the right order, but if you hit any of them wrong, they all reset in order to open up jail cell doors. And sometimes the buttons spawn on top of each other, which makes things even more challenging.
Yeah, that was something I really wanted to try and get rid of a little. But it ran out of time, and it became an interesting kind of mechanic because you had to get close to them and be incredibly precise with your movements.
As a giant circle.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't intended to be a game mechanic where they overlapped, but it turned out to kind of be one. At least that's my excuse.
It's a good excuse. There's a game called Bear Hunt ? Which is a bear being attacked by hunters, and you have to fight back, basically.
Yeah, that's although it's pixelated, that's probably one of my most gory games, actually.
Pixel blood everywhere.
Yeah.
You have Gretel's Grub, which is about a little girl named Gretel who's dying, so you have to feed her before she starves to death by collecting little bushes, berries.
That game ended up being far more difficult than I originally intended.
Oh, she always dies for me.
There's no end. There's no end to it. A lot of my 1 hour game jams are about beating a high score rather than reaching a predetermined end of game. But yeah, just even staying alive for a few turns is quite difficult.
Another game where you eat is Tasty Villagers, so you're a monster just eating as many hungry humans, or eating as many villagers as you can before you die of hunger.
Yeah, I wanted to turn the usual enemy good guy thing on its head a little for that one.
And Tunnel Racer I do enjoy as well. It's sort of a car-based game where you have to pick the lanes so that you go through a tunnel as opposed to hitting a wall. And sometimes it is impossible, I think, or at least I'm just not good enough, but you have to get the highest score by staying alive. But I found it cool that there's just one point that you have to go through instead of dodging traffic or anything. You have to get to that one point.
Yeah, that once again is very hard, and I'm not quite sure if it's impossible or not. Obviously, as you saw, it will position the kind of tunnel in the wall at a random point. So if you're on one side of the screen, it puts it on the other side. You're going to have to hit that key damn fast to get it.
And I'm not sure if Too Cold to Type would be considered like an arcade game or a typing game, or if typing games are a type of arcade game. But that's a typing game where you type as fast as possible, and I love typing games where you type as fast as possible, so I enjoyed that one personally.
Yeah, that was quite fun to make. That wasn't actually using any engine whatsoever. That was kind of raw JavaScript and HTML, that one. There was no game engine behind it whatsoever. It's literally just a web page.
And the weird thing about this game, for me, is that some of the words have more than one of the same letters in. So, for example, earmuffs is one of the words, and it has two Fs next to each other. But if you type F once, it highlights both Fs, so you don't have to necessarily type these letters in order.
Yes.
Just fast.
Yeah, if you work that out early on enough, then you can kind of skip a keystroke and self through faster.
That's quite nice. But as opposed to those arcade games, on the flip side, you've also done a couple of story-based games, though not as many. For 1 hour game jam, you've made an interactive fiction, as well as a Twine game.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to read a lot of the writing prompts on Reddit, which I've always been interested in maybe participating. So for anyone who doesn't know about that, that's it's a subreddit in which some people post kind of prompts to say, set the scene for a story, and then people reply with a full story, short story on the subject. So I've always liked the idea of writing a story into a game and kind of inspired by that kind of thing. But it's really challenging, especially to do in 1 hour. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest things, in my opinion, is kind of the content creation. And obviously, heavily story built game, the only thing really is content.
Yeah.
There's nothing else. Just text and text. So yeah, they were both really challenging. I'm quite happy how they came out. I have to admit, the eventually one button game, which was for 1 Hour Game Jam 69. That one, it's the style of interactive fiction like Zork, where you type in commands to say go north, pick up the key, and so on. That one did take me quite a bit over an hour initially. I think I was probably 1 hour 20 or something like that.
Cheats.
I know, cheats, hacks, but that was a lot of that was actually. This was when I mentioned earlier I struggled to find out how to export the game afterwards. This was the problem.
Game.
This was the problem here, because I although I had used this particular engine in the past, it would have been a very long time ago, and I'd only really played around with it. So exporting it to HTML, and it wasn't working as I intended either. There was some kind of problem with it working on my machine. I'm not certain what the issue was now, but that was very challenging to get done in an hour. And I think it ended up being slightly more simple than I intended, but it kind of got the job done. It's a nice little puzzle.
It's a puzzle made in an hour, all in text. I mean, it's going to be a bit simple, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed how different it was, because a lot of people, as you said, it's hard to make a story in an hour, especially a story that works and that you can interact with in more ways. Because this is different from a Twine game. You do type in stuff. I'm not saying it's like way easier to make in a Twine game. It's just, it's difficult. And the fact that you made one in an hour completely blew my mind. So
it was, cool. Yeah. I mean, the tool I used in Form 7 for the eventually one button one, it kind of helps you out a bit. It's unusual. You're writing you're using a programming language, but the programming language is supposed to be as close to plain English as possible. So it's really interesting how they do that. So yeah, I mean, I think it ended up being a decent puzzle game. And the other kind of interactive fiction one, as you say, was a Twine game, which I really just wanted to tell a story in that rather than provide any real gameplay.
Yeah.
There's choices, but they're choices just in what order you view things, really. The story is supposed to be kind of a bit of a dramatic twist kind of thing in a way.
Did you enjoy writing up these games?
I did. I mean, I don't do a lot of fiction writing at all anymore, really. So I don't know how good the quality of the writing is compared to things, but I really enjoyed it. And the few people I've shown them, they said it's pretty good.
I would agree. It's pretty good.
Thank you.
That's my opinion. So, speaking of games that are pretty good, what is your favorite game that you've made in a game jam?
That's a pretty tough one.
Yes. You can pick a couple.
Well, I think it's probably the Mr. Antibody game,
right.
Which isn't one you've mentioned yet, but that was for the latest Ludum Dare 38, which I think the theme was a small world.
Yes, so you basically have different infected parts of like a human body, and you kind of bring your antibody, well, you shoot your antibody against bacteria, but you have to move towards where you're shooting. So there's a chance that you get too close and you bump into them and then lose some of your energy.
Precisely, yes. I kind of really like it. It feels like one of my most polished games that I've made, perhaps. As you say, you're this little antibody and you destroy bacteria, which is kind of where I was going with the small world thing, inside a body. It's kind of got, as I say, I feel like it's most polished. It's got kind of a proper title screen. It's got multiple levels with decent level selection screen. You can see the human body and you click the organ.
Yes, that title screen's pretty cool. You selecting just like body parts.
Yeah. And it's got this. You can set different difficulties as well, from reasonably easy to ridiculously hard. I couldn't finish testing because it was so hard. Each level as well has its own specific like enemy or effect in it as well. So every level has these bacteria in it, but there's also, say, the heart, for example, has red blood cells in it, which are just bouncing around, kind of getting in the way. But if you shoot one of those, then you actually lose energy in the same way as if you were to get attacked by one of the bacteria. So you've got to kind of destroy all the bacteria, shooting them, but at the same time avoid damaging the organ itself. And each of the organs has that kind of own effect as well.
Yeah, which is quite clever.
Yeah.
Also, the movement on your white blood cell that you sort of drag your mouse farther away to run faster.
Yes.
That's quite nice.
I played around with the movement quite a bit. Originally, I was just going to go with kind of a standard, you move at the same speed towards the mouse pointer all the time. But I kind of experimented with a few ideas and found this actually worked really nicely, how you could kind of make tiny, small movements by moving your mouse a little bit, or throw it to the other side of the screen, and your antibody would kind of follow you really quickly.
It makes it feel more fair, especially when you have to move towards the enemy to shoot it.
Yes,
you can then quickly get away.
You need to get the heck out of there very quickly. I thought another reason I think this is probably one of my favorite is that I said previously I'm no real artist, but I thought the graphics that I made for this were pretty reasonable.
The eyes are adorable.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing, I remember hearing about it before. There's this kind of joke that was going around on Twitter about game dev and saying, stick googly eyes on everything. So I thought I'd follow suit with that. So everything in there, your antibody and the bacteria, it's all got little eyes on there that kind of look around and things. I think it makes it fun. It makes it silly. It's a nice bit of kind of juice or polish on the game.
I'd agree. They're very adorable bacteria that you are killing.
bit of an odd one there. But yeah, I like it. It's polished. I've got kind of animations where things are like when you destroy a bacteria, it doesn't just disappear. It kind of zooms out. It kind of disappears into nothingness rather than just immediately clicking and going away. I'm quite happy with the overall polish of that game, which is probably makes it my favorite.
Cool. On the other end of that, what's your least favorite game that you've made?
Yeah, again, really difficult. I suppose the ones that my least favorite, probably the ones that are kind of the least impressive games that I've presented. So typically the least impressive games I present are usually my first entries into the particular jams. So like my first entry into Lewd and Dare was a game called Balloon Bullies, which was like really basic graphics. I mean, I think one of the comments on the entry page at the time was, my 3-year-old could draw these kind of graphics or something like that.
That's so sad.
We're like, okay, yeah, that's maybe a little harsh, but yeah, they are really, really simple.
They are very simple. Basically, you're controlling a balloon and you want to stop the red balloon from being hit by rocks, and there's 2 keys that let you move it different ways, like either right or left and up or down, and you just sort of hit that button and the balloon starts floating that way, and you hope you don't get hit by rocks.
Exactly, yeah, and it's all very simple graphic wise. Even the sounds were very simple, and I was actually not at home at the moment. Didn't have access to my desktop PC, so the sound effects were created myself through my dodgy laptop microphone. So you've literally got sound effects of me just blowing, going.
All in the spirit of a true jammer.
Yeah, it was so simple. But I wanted to do it properly. I wanted to make everything myself, and I did. But yeah, first time I entered Ludum Dare, and it was pretty nasty.
I
Um,
must say I do like how the difficulty curve doesn't get more challenging from just having more people to throw rocks at you, but the balloon also gets bigger.
yeah, I thought that was a funny little feature. So the balloon's kind of getting larger and larger as time goes by. So you have more difficulty dodging them. I kind of added that because the enemies throw their rocks really inaccurately at you.
Mm.
There's absolutely no complex maths behind how they do it. So it's not at all accurate. And I wanted to kind of change, just make it a bit more interesting, make it more difficult. So yeah, the balloon gets bigger as time goes by, which I suppose logically doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Balloons don't typically pump themselves up, but there we go.
Well, even though it was your first entry, it does have some nice mechanics in it.
Yeah, there's a few different difficulty levels on that. I did actually use as well. I did use an engine myself, and a friend of mine created specifically for HTML and JavaScript games. So it wasn't, one of the more well-known engines at all, but it turned out to be quite interesting.
You and your friend created it.
Um, the engine that one is based on is the Conv game engine, which is one that's it's a very very simple engine designed to allow you to make HTML like games that will work well on devices of different sizes. But it's very early on in development kind of engine, but it's got a few of the basics like scene management, different objects, sprites, and so on.
It's quite interesting. So, my favorite game that you've made is a game that we haven't talked about yet, the Professional Shapeshifter. It was made for Ludum Dare 35. I find it to be a really interesting and somewhat adorable game. You play as a shapeshifter who's being interviewed for a job. You have to type your answers into a box to the questions you're being asked, and each time you're interviewed, the questions are different, so you don't play through the same default set of questions.
Yes.
How does the game handle all of the different answers a player gives? Because the interviewer does have some different responses like, that's interesting, or that's exactly what I was looking for. But is there like a broad umbrella scope of stuff that it would accept, whereas there's other things that it just doesn't recognize and that's why it doesn't like them? Or is there a specific answer we're aiming for?
Well, it's interesting. Some of the questions have a single answer. Some of them have multiple possible rightish answers. I tried to get a few people to test it and saw what kind of things they came up with. It surprised me. Some people would test it and kind of give answers that I didn't expect. So I'd kind of add those if they were seemed right. But implementation wise, it is basically keywords. When you enter things, it will check the keywords and give you, if that keyword appeared anywhere in what you typed, it would give a positive response. Otherwise, it would give a kind of negative, or I tried to kind of go with kind of the typical job interview style where they'll never say no, that's wrong. They'll just say things like
you're not wrong, but
which really I think it resulted in a really interesting thing where you couldn't quite tell whether the answer was right until the end when
he tells me I can't have a job over and over again.
Exactly. So I kind of really liked how that turned out. There are specific phrases for. In fact, the code for the game has two files for kind of. These are a whole load of things it says if the answer is correct. Here's a whole load of things that it says if it's not quite what it's after. And sometimes they're almost identical. Like if I remember correctly, it can both say that's interesting. But it will go ... if it's wrong, or exclamation mark if it's right. But there's loads of mixed things, so it's really. I tried to make it so it wasn't obvious.
Yeah. Well, it's not obvious at all, and I've never gotten a job from that shapeshifter, so I don't think they're actually hiring, but.
Oh, keep trying. There are definitely vacancies.
In my favorites, there is a sort of honorable mention to Joopy Jumps, the game that you made for my birthday jam.
Yes, yeah. That was I think the first game I'd ever that wasn't just an experiment that I kind of pushed out that used the Love 2D engine. And that's quite a clever. I did something that I'd not tried before in that. It says it has 100 levels.
Yes.
In the game, it kind of does, and it kind of doesn't.
There's so just some premise to this. It is a side-scrolling platformer where you play my star logo with googly eyes, and you have to collect coins and try not to hit the wall, like fall off the screen, basically.
Yeah, and so the objective is to get to the far right of the level as fast as possible, hopefully collecting the coins as you go. But it's one where it's got 100 levels, with the 100th level being the hardest and the first being the simplest.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't custom design these levels. I used an algorithm that I kind of made up that uses a simplex noise, it's called, which is a kind of something that's used in procedural generation to generate the kind of height of the barriers and platforms that you're jumping around on, and also the position of the coins in the levels. So the levels get harder and harder because the speed of the scrolling of the level is faster and faster based on which level number you're at. So level 100's got the fastest scrolling level, and it's really, really, really hard to complete. But the first one is quite leisurely, and you can usually get all the coins and things without too much of a problem. But each time you play, each level is exactly the same. So they're procedurally generated, but they're procedurally generated based on the level's number.
That's really interesting.
As I say, I really like procedural generation stuff.
Have you ever considered entering the Proc Jam?
I've seen so much. It's quite coincidental. After you first contacted me about doing this interview, I've seen so much about the Proc Jam, and I just hadn't heard about it before. And it does sound really interesting. I think one just finished quite recently, if I'm correct.
No.
No? Okay,
I'll tell you a bit about it because I'm a big part of the Proc Jam. Let's advertise the Proc Jam for a moment. It's a yearly game jam that happens in November. It was just recently kickstarted because it normally relies on funding. And they wanted to see if they could self-fund it through Kickstarter. But basically that funding goes through, there's like loads of talks that either happen at a physical location, but also live streamed online, and that are put on a YouTube channel by people who do procedural generation. There's some tutorials made for people who are just starting out or who want to get into a different part of procedural generation. There are art kits and art packs that are good for procedurally generating characters that are created alongside the jam and given out before the jam that are free to use and make money off of under Creative Commons, I believe. And there's a zine, or a zine, as normal people would read it. There's a zine, is what I call them, that the community makes by submitting articles to it, and that's what's currently open. They've just secured spots for people who are making tutorials and art, and now they're looking for submissions for their zine, which I lay out and put together. Well, I did last year, and I'm going to be doing it again this year with the help of some of the other team members, and it should be super cool.
Oh, that sounds excellent. I'm guessing that funding's why I've heard of it recently, but no, that sounds like something I'd be really interested in getting into. A lot of my games rely on procedural generation, even in its kind of most simple form sometimes. But yeah, that sounds really interesting.
It's a pretty cool jam. I can't wait to see what you come up with.
I'll definitely have to kind of look into it closer to the time in November.
But back to this. So I love the Proc Jam. I have a small place in my heart for the Proc Jam. But
Right.
how often do you continue your game after the jam has ended? Or have you at all?
Well, often, as I mentioned before, I kind of use the game jams to try out new ideas, or sometimes just iterate on ideas I've already had, but things I've thought about and written down. I sometimes use the game jam to try them out to see if it's fun or anything. I've considered continuing some of the games beyond the game jam, And I have done some kind of planning for some of them, and I've done some initial development to that end, but none are really close to any kind of release for that yet. I suppose a good example is actually, funny you should mention it previously, the professional shapeshifter one.
Mm-hmm.
I've considered several improvements to that make it possible to, for example, send people's answers to a web service and allow me to kind of review them and improve the interviewer's ability to judge people's answers. So kind of make it less static, and then maybe when the game starts, it could download a new list of updates silently in the background to say give the interviewer more questions or things like that. I've also done some work to make it maybe more of a standalone game, rather than just being purely web-based as it is now. A few things like that. I don't know. It's very hard, I think, at least I find it very hard to get a game jam which has got kind of a limited scope, deliberately been made limited to fit into either the time restriction or the theme or something like that, and then actually continue that onwards into something that would be something kind of full, or something, potentially that you'd be willing to sell or something like that. It seems to me it's hard to do that. So far, the things that I have put out there, and like the one game I have put out kind of commercially so far, and other things I'm working on, are kind of, they take some ideas from game jam games, but they're never directly a enhanced game jam game.
That's fair enough.
Well, I do notice a lot of people doing that. I see on Steam, for example, the Ludum Dare games on Steam. There's I think there's curators that specifically focus on them, and those things look like there's so much polish. It's really impressive. So I would love to do, I'd love, any of my games to like live up to the standards of a lot of those ones. But I think it would be very interesting to do that for a game jam game. I think it would have to be one of the larger game jams like Ludum Dare, or maybe JS13K possibly. But I don't think 1 hour game jam style games.
Yeah.
I don't think they'd be recognizable after you were to get it to a kind of a commercial kind of level of polish.
That's fair enough. A lot of your game jam games have published source code, and this doesn't just Ludum Dare games. It's like your 1 hour game jam games have your source code published in the description. Is there any reason behind you doing that?
Well, I mean, I'm a big supporter of open source and open source community in general. I like to think so. And as I mentioned before, I've got lots of stuff on GitHub, be it games or kind of libraries for web development or other experiments I've done, things like that. Some of them get some attention, some of them get less so. It's always the case for open source projects. So, I mean, I really like to do that. And so plenty of my game dev things, if not most of them, that I've done for game jams have their source code available on my GitHub profile. I do feel it's important to note that some of them, there is a difference with open source, which I don't know, because obviously Ludum Dare, if you do the compo, the 48 hour,
it requires you to release source code.
Exactly, it requires you to release source code. What it doesn't require, as far as I'm aware, is you to actually license that source code with an open source license. So, because obviously the primary reason they require that is so that other people can look at it and gain, kind of like learn from it and things. You don't people developing these games don't necessarily, especially if, as you said, they want to enhance them or kind of go further with them. They don't necessarily want people just being able to copy that and then release it as their own game a little later on. So if not all of the games I've released, I think most of them, but not all of them have a open source license attached. So I would love everyone to look at them for like learning about new game development things, and sometimes seeing my horribly rushed code at the end of 1 hour game jam and things. But not all of them. It's always worth taking a look for any open source project. Take a look at the license if there is one.
Yeah.
Make sure it is, you're allowed to copy it if that's what you want to do. If there isn't one, assume the person in control who published that wants to keep it their own, but it's just kind of presenting it for academic and learning reasons. But as I say, the vast majority of my stuff, open source license, people can do almost whatever they want with it. But some of them are more restrictive. I think it is important to kind of share source code for things, especially early on things. It can be really helpful for new programmers. I mean, personally, and I know a lot of other people like this, I learn really well from example in anything really, but in programming ever so much. I think it's really helpful for current game devs and future ones.
That's really kind of you to put that out there.
Well, as I say, I really think game jams really help developers, and if they can kind of see something to start with, like for example, I mentioned previously that when I do my 1 hour game jams, I often take like boilerplate code about logic from my previous games. So I'll actually go on my own GitHub profile and look at that and go, that if I just take that bit, bring it into this game, it's not like copying anything significant, but it's gonna make it a whole lot faster for me to get something there. Which I think is why my 1 hour game jam games have started off incredibly simple, because I kind of wrote a lot of boilerplate standard game engine style stuff from scratch in them, and then I've slowly been able to move that across and kind of spend more time on the real game, meat of the games.
So, one of the last questions I have to ask you are, what are some things you've learned from game jams? Like, what are the top things that you've learned and advice you'd give to people who want to do, like, the 1 hour game jam, for example?
Well, especially for the 1 hour game jam, but for all game jams in general, and even all game development, I suppose. Keep your scope small. So by that I mean, don't think this game's going to be, the new World of Warcraft. It should do everything, or it's not. And it's the same. In a way, it's similar to the same kind of things that result from game companies who accidentally make their game out to be more than it is, and then people end up disappointed. It's the game. I think it's the game development version of that. So, like Spore and No Man's Sky, for example, great examples of games where the developer showed it off as this amazing thing. The gaming communities went, "Wow, this is going to be fantastic and do a million things." And then there was quite a bit. I mean, I like No Man's Sky, I like Spore, but there was a heck of a lot of disappointment from a lot of gamers about those games. So for game development, keep your scope small. So don't think about adding loads and loads of features, because you're going to get so overwhelmed by developing things. Sometimes you'll find that something you thought was going to be simple, there's for some reason some weird issue that you didn't anticipate, maybe something that the engine you're using does in a strange way that makes what you're trying to do really difficult, or it just has knock-on effects that you didn't anticipate on other parts of your games, be it kind of gameplay mechanics or kind of programming problems where you do one thing that causes a bug somewhere else. So I think keeping your scope small and kind of going for kind of a minimum product to start with, kind of getting something that's just playable with the core game mechanics first and foremost. I think that's really important. Then you can start adding the fluff and the power-ups and the menus and the fancy UI and extra things like that. I think the only other thing I could say is don't immediately jump into development. Spend a reasonable percentage of your time designing for the main gameplay, like the core game mechanics. Like I said with 1 hour game jam, I mean, this is extreme. I essentially spend up to 50% sometimes on the 1 hour doing the kind of designing and thinking up the idea. As silly as it sounds and kind of old-fashioned as it can be really handy to visually write out in a notepad or something, just draw out ideas and things like that. I mean, I have a notebook on my desk now that's full of random ideas for game development. Some of them went nowhere, some of them are things that I'm actually developing, and they're just like completely random ideas, even sometimes just one sentence that says, time travel in a place, or just like story ideas, gameplay mechanic ideas. Write stuff down when you're thinking of it. I do know some streamers that I've watched do Lud and Dare coding before. They can often spend the first like several hours, like 6-ish hours, just coming up with ideas, maybe trying to prototype something basic around those ideas. I've seen game developers for these, like Lud and Dare, who will do an idea for the first one and a bit days, and then go, this isn't working, and scrap it, and scrap most of what they've done and try again. But you've really got to focus on getting your core game mechanic, make sure it's fun, and then build it from there.
Very solid advice.
Yeah, and they can be really fun as well. I mean, that's made it sound like it's a huge, really difficult, horrible piece of work, but game jams can be really fun. The kind of, and the satisfaction of getting something out there to play for other people. As I said right near the beginning, it's one of the biggest problems for a lot of developers, game dev or otherwise, is getting things out there. The satisfaction of finally being able to get something out there to show people. Especially if you've never managed to do that before with a game, that can be really exhilarating and really great, especially seeing comments and seeing people actually play them, which game jams particularly encourage.
That's really cool. I very much enjoy commenting and giving feedback on all these little game jam games.
Yeah, I mean, I do as well. I'm nowhere near as good as some of the people at judging them, especially for Lud and Dare. It's quite time consuming, as you of all people very well know.
Yes.
But I really enjoy doing it as well. There's a great sense of community I find in game development.
But moving away a little bit from game jams, would you like to talk about your current projects, or about the game that you've released, or?
Sure. Well, the game I released relatively recently, it's like I think it's about 3 months ish now, was a game called Parsec Pizza Delivery, which I believe you did a video of a slightly early version of it, which is out now. It's a couple of dollars on itch.io. And it's essentially an arcade game. So going back to what we said, one of the things I like to develop, which you're delivering pizzas to other planets, and you've got to avoid a whole bunch of space traffic that's coming your way. And it's each playthrough, it's basically arcade style. I tried to kind of emulate the style of old arcade machines. It's kind of pixel arty graphics, really retro style in that way. And you've essentially just got to get as far as you can, deliver as many as you can. There's high scores, there's achievements, there's statistics, there's a whole bunch of things like that. It works with keyboard or controller or however you want to play.
The pizza names were something I found particularly cool with the game. And there's procedural pizzas.
There is procedural pizzas. I mean, the game's got kind of random level generation. Well, level, I say, the enemies you encounter are random and things like that, which is kind of the main procedural elements. But yeah, the pizza toppings that it comes up on every delivery note you get before each delivery, it will spit out a random pizza. You can get things like ham and mushroom, but you can also get some really strange ones as well, which I think you saw in your video.
Yeah, I remember catching some really strange futuristic pizza names that I look forward to having when my pizza can be delivered by spaceship.
Yeah, well, it also generates the planet names procedurally. Although it's kind of just for aesthetics, it just looks a bit fun. It generates those randomly too.
Cool. All right, so is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I would like, despite me making it seem like a horrific task, I would like to really encourage other developers to participate in game jams, because it is really fun, and the experience you gain from it, from just from a programming perspective and time management or kind of scoping perspective, it's really invaluable. It really, I mean, after starting doing game jams, that really made me want to do more kind of game development stuff in my free time. It really encouraged me. And as I say, after completing something, it's a great feeling. And also, I suppose sharing your stuff is super important.
Yes.
So many people worry about sharing things, sharing their work or in progress things and stuff. Especially like on Twitter, game dev seems to be very popular on Twitter. Screenshots, GIFs, and videos, they're great. But even just text updates about what you're doing, like different things you've done. I mean, I believe you wrote an article on good kind of hashtags, for example, that you can use in say tweets or posts in general, like the game dev, the indie dev, and Screenshot Saturday, which is always popular. And sometimes I do just browse those. There's fantastic stuff people do.
And it's really inspiring, and there's a big community aspect around not only game jams, but as you said, the game development community on Twitter. And sharing your work there, it allows you to hear from other people who will be encouraging. As much as you might not be proud of your own work, other people will find it amazing. People like me who can't code or program or make art and find it amazing that people make stuff in jams. I appreciate all of the works in progress that I find.
I do love it, and as I said, I've browsed these before, and I've commented on some saying, this looks really cool. It reminds me of something I've seen before, and they'll just go, "Wow, yeah." People are really appreciative of feedback, and I mean, you're not going to get feedback or likes of your work if you don't share things. So even if you're not just kind of one of the programs, even if you're not making the new features, if you're a designer doing some of the art, or if you're writing some of the content or the storyline and things, there's loads of stuff that can be posted, and I found that really encouraging when I post things, even if I don't necessarily get comments. If something gets a load of likes or a load of retweets, it can be great that people seeing, obviously you do get bots retweeting your stuff.
Yes.
There's quite a lot of those that kind of aggregate content together for people to see all in one go, which is great as well. But when you see likes from actual people come in as well, sometimes, and it's great to see people kind of appreciating it. It's really great to get stuff out there and see what people think.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time.
It's perfectly fine.
I hope you enjoyed this.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.
No problem. Where's the best place to get in touch with you if people want to follow your work?
Well, I'm mostly active on Twitter. So that's at Divine Omega, DIVINEOMEGA. And if you want to look at my games, the ones we've discussed about in the game jams, or even the paid one Parsec pizza delivery, they're all on my itch.io profile, which is creatively named divineomega.itch.io.
And the links to those will be in the description, so you can check them out.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Bye.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.